Brie Nicole, and I'm back with another video. And this is going to be a video on why I quit my long-term care nursing job as a LPN. So for those of you who don't know, I went to LPN school in 2017. I graduated 2018, and I worked as a LPN up until 2021 at a long-term care facility. That was my only job as a LPN. I did an application for a hospital, but I never went because the pay was literally like my sales associate's pay, being in a hospital, because they paid RNs more. So I never did like take the offer to leave the long-term care facility. But once I got my RN degree, I went to a hospital. So I'm going to tell you why I ended up quitting that job. They did offer me like more pay and everything to stay there, but I was like, I couldn't do it anymore. So I'm just going to tell you like pros and cons of working at a long-term care facility and just why I ended up leaving. I started there as a new grad nurse in 2018. So that was my very first nursing job. I didn't have any like experience whatsoever, just from clinicals. So I was on orientation for 3 weeks. I trained 2 weeks on days, and then I transitioned to training 1 week on nights because I was going to be a full-time night shift nurse, but they did want me to see how things were during the day, like while the patients were actually awake, so I could see like their personalities and everything. So I did train 2 weeks on days and then 1 week on nights. And then she was like, do you feel comfortable? And I was like, I guess so. You know, if I need help, I'll just ask the other nurses. So I was cut loose after 3 weeks. I worked on a 32-bed unit, which was a lot. So it was just a lot to get used to, but I eventually got it down pat. I say within like 6 months or so is when I actually just stopped feeling overwhelmed coming to work. So I guess I will start with the pros. I kind of tried to make a list here. Your residents are somewhat stable. So that's a good thing. You don't really have to kind of like take care of anybody, if that makes sense, versus like working in a hospital where, you know, people come in that are sick. So that's their home. So they're somewhat stable. You may have some that are like, you know, that could get sick or something may happen, but you know, if we couldn't treat them there, then we would just call the ambulance to come pick them up to take them to the hospital. Only other pro was like as far as med pads, I guess comparing it to a hospital, I only gave pills and like sub-Q shots, sometimes IM shots when they were prescribed IM medicine, but that would usually only be like an antibiotic or like a vitamin shot that they would get, something like that. I wasn't giving it all the time. It was just every so often. And then I did have a patient that was on like IV fluids, maybe like twice, but that didn't happen often as well. So honestly, y'all, those were like the only pros that I could think of, was pretty much that, you know, I only popped pills and I had like stable residents. I could not think of anything else that was like a pro to working at a long-term care facility. Now, cons. I did have a lot more cons than pros. So the cons would be too many residents. I only had a 32-bed hall. I had a 32-room hall, but only 15 of the rooms were single rooms. The other pretty much half of the hall was double beds. So let's see, 32 minus 16, so 16 times 2 plus 16. So I actually had a total of 48 residents, because yes, rooms were double, and on one of our halls we had like 6 big rooms where those rooms were triple. And I did work on that hall when I went PRN. There was an A, B, and C bed, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that that was the thing on that hall until I went PRN over there. So yeah, I had a total of 48 residents, which was a lot to have to do to pass meds. We had to do our own blood sugars. That was the next con. So some people had to get their sugar checked before every meal. some would be like twice a day, some would be 3 times a day, just depending on their order. So that was another thing. We had to do our own AccuChecks, and being that you would have like 48 residents, by the time you did that first med pass, you already be tired. Like, I used to be so tired when I first started after that first med pass, because everybody got something when I first got there at like 8 or 9. There was only maybe one resident that didn't have a med at that time. Everybody else had something. So I would be so tired after doing that first med pass. I used to be like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through the rest of my shift when everybody got something at that time? Now, the other times throughout my shift, like at 12, 2, 3, maybe like 6, only a few people got something. But at that time, everybody did. And it was just really overwhelming, because when you first got there, you had to start that big med pass, and people would be calling you for stuff. They may come up and stop you for like payments, or somebody fell, or something's going on. And if something happened during that med pass that would like throw you off, you wouldn't be getting done until like 10:30, when they were supposed to get the med at 8 or 9. So that's the other con. If something happened during that med pass, it would just completely throw you off. I even started a whole hour early, like literally starting as soon as I got there at 7. I would start at like 7:15, and just to give myself enough time. But if anything happened, you would be stuck giving those meds at 10:30. The next thing on my list was burnout. I eventually got burnout. That was my first job. I would say within a year, I was burned out at that facility. And even the nurses that were there were like, oh my gosh, I'm surprised you're still here. Like, as a new grad, we've never had somebody stay like more than a year. Everybody would quit. Only like seasoned nurses would stay. And the nurses that I worked with had been at that facility for like 5+ years. So they were like, yeah, everybody new that started ended up quitting. And they were right, because, you know, there were other nurses that were there throughout my career that eventually quit, only stay like 6 months to a year, to like a year and a half. So I did experience burnout. It is very easy in a long-term care facility. So that's another thing with just having so many people you have to look after. You do experience burnout, because sometimes the shifts would go easy. Other times you would be like running the entire shift, especially dealing with the elderly in general, because of, you know, like disease processes like dementias, Alzheimer's, sundowners, all of that. It just comes into play, and then you have to like watch certain residents that were fall risk. So it was just a lot. Speaking of fall risk, that's another thing I put on my risk. Somebody was falling every week. I don't think I went like a whole week without somebody falling or hurting themselves in that facility. It was a lot. Like, you have a lot of falls because you're short-staffed of nurses and CNAs, so you can't watch everybody. But the ones that we did know that were trying to like get up all the time and move around a lot, we did try to keep a close eye out on them or have them in the halls with us. So that was another thing. A lot of people were fall risk. Also, I don't know if this was just at my facility, but there were like a lack of supplies sometimes. I would always have to go like borrow supplies from like other halls, or we would just be out of it facility wide. Also, lack of staff. So like I said, they went through a lot of employees while I were there. Not only nurses, CNAs as well. There is a big shortage in long-term care facilities on staff, because you have a lot of total patients that can't do anything for themselves. So you're constantly lifting and pulling them and having to do pretty much everything for them. So we were always short on CNAs, short on nurses, and that just would make you not want to come to work. If you were a nurse on a hall and only had like 2 CNAs when you're supposed to have like 4 or 5, and that happened more often than it should have happened, because I also had to help them. Once I got done with meds, I had to help them and do like their duties. So sometimes I didn't even get to everything I needed to do because I was having to help them. There was one day where I showed up and there was only 1 CNA that had showed up for that shift, which was very unacceptable. They didn't pull anybody from another hall. and we both complained, but we were by ourselves up until for like 4 hours, and then a second one showed up, which was still unacceptable when we were supposed to have 4 to 5 on that hall. So I just got to a point where I, didn't want to come to work anymore. And by the time that happened, I was actually PRN. So they didn't have a nurse, and they knew they were going to be short CNAs. And I just felt like I was thrown under the bus when I showed up to work, because the scheduler know that those people were not coming to work because they like called out. She texted me, I want to say that day before, to come in. So I was like, sure. But that was another thing, like the staff shortage and just constantly having to deal with that. And plus, like, doing your job, it was just very overwhelming, and I just got to the point where I hated to go to work. So that was another thing that was like getting me through the LPN to RN mobility program, because I was like, I can't do this. I can't go to a hospital, because they were literally cutting my pay in half, offering me like $13-14 to work as an LPN at a hospital. And I was like, I could not do that. So that's why I eventually quit my job at the facility once I did complete the RN program, because it was not worth it. The hospital actually offered me more pay than they did, and I had only 5 patients in the hospital and doing like very much less work. So that's why I did quit my job after I got my RN degree and started in the hospital. I stayed PRN for a while, even after becoming an RN, but eventually I just put in a notice that I wouldn't be coming back there. And this video is not to scare anybody away from nursing facilities, because, like I said, there were nurses that had been there for like 5 years, 10 years that loved it. So, I mean, it's not to scare anybody away, but I'm just letting you know this was my experience at the facility that I worked at. So yes, that is why I quit my job, and right now I'm still working in the hospital. So that was all I had for y'all today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what other videos you would like to see, and I will be sure to get more content out to you guys, and I will see y'all in my next video. Bye guys.